Hey everyone, I'm Felicia Kashivaroff, an ICF certified relationship coach and founder of Tend Task. There's one important conversation that most engaged couples never have. What relationship patterns are we recreating? Our parents, our culture, our religious upbringing, or are we building something entirely new? You think you're entering this marriage as two individuals making conscious choices about your partnership. You're not. You're bringing decades of unconscious programming about who does what, who has power, whose needs matter, and what a good partner looks like. And here's the problem. You can't deconstruct patterns you don't even know you're carrying. Today, I'm talking about the one conversation that actually matters before marriage and why you cannot have it alone. Let me show you what unconscious patterns actually look like. You watched your mom manage everyone's schedules, remember every birthday, and coordinate all the logistics while your dad helped when asked. Now you're living together and somehow you feel compelled to do the same thing. It feels natural. It doesn't feel like a choice. That's because it isn't. It's a pattern. Or maybe you grew up in a household where the person who made more money or had more wealth coming into the relationship got more say in decisions. Now, you're planning a wedding, and one of you is deferring to the other on major choices because of financial differences. You think you're being practical. You're actually recreating a power dynamic you inherited. These patterns come from four main sources. Your family of origin taught you what partnership looks like. Who did the emotional labor? Who made sacrifices? Whose career came first? Who apologized? You absorbed these lessons before you could even name them. And now you're unconsciously building a relationship that replicates or reactively rejects what you saw growing up. Your culture gave you scripts about what makes someone a good wife or a good husband. Who should be nurturing? Who should be stoic? What counts as real work versus just helping out? These messages are so embedded that you probably don't even recognize them as cultural programming. Your religion, if you have one, handed you beliefs about submission, leadership, sacrifice, and duty. Even if you've left organized religion, those teachings about whose needs should come first don't just disappear. They show up in how you navigate conflict and make decisions. And the structures of oppression you live in, like patriarchy, created default settings where one partner's needs, preferences, and time are treated as more important than the others. Where one person's career is the career and the other person's is supplemental. Where household management just somehow becomes one person's job. Here's what makes this so insidious. These patterns feel like personal preferences. They feel like love. They feel like just how we are. They're not. They're conditioning. And if you don't actively deconstruct them before marriage, you'll spend the next decade fighting about dishes and schedules without ever understanding that you're actually fighting about power, equity, and whose humanity gets to matter more. So, why can't you just have this conversation yourselves? You're both smart people, you love each other, you can read books and watch videos. Here's why. These patterns are unconscious. By definition, you cannot see them without someone outside your system pointing them out. When you automatically take on all the wedding planning coordination, you don't think, I'm enacting cultural messaging that weddings are supposed to be my day as the bride. You think, I'm supposed to care about this more. When your partner defers to you on financial decisions because you make more money, they don't think, I'm perpetuating capitalism's conflation of earning power with decision-making power. They think, this is just practical. When you find yourself apologizing constantly while your partner rarely does, you don't see a power dynamic. You just think you're more sensitive or they're more confident. You need someone who can observe your interactions and name what's actually happening. Someone who can challenge you to consider what patterns are showing up and whether they are authentically yours or belong to the messaging you received growing up. This is why research shows that couples who receive premarital education are more likely to seek support throughout their marriage. Not because their marriages are struggling, because they've learned that having someone outside their system is valuable. They understand that you cannot see your own blind spots. And here's the thing about traditional premarital counseling. Most of it focuses on communication skills, conflict resolution, and commitment. Concepts that matter, but are completely useless if the underlying patterns and power dynamics haven't been examined. You can learn active listening techniques all day long, but if one partner's needs are unconsciously treated as more important than the others, those techniques won't fix anything. You'll just be really good at listening to each other and justifying why one person's perspective consistently wins out. The foundational work is deconstructing the patterns. Everything else, communication, conflict resolution, building systems, becomes exponentially easier once you've done that. When you actually deconstruct these unconscious patterns before marriage, everything shifts. Suddenly, you're not fighting about who does the dishes. You're having a conscious conversation about how household labor gets distributed and whose time is valued. You're not fighting about whether to invite his difficult family member. You're examining whose comfort gets prioritized and why, and making an intentional decision together. You're not just fighting about money, you're addressing the ways financial power has been misused in both your families and designing a system that doesn't replicate those dynamics. Because now you're building from a place of actual equity and consciousness, rather than replicating what you inherited and calling it love. So here's the conversation you actually need to have before you get married. Are we willing to deconstruct the unconscious patterns we're bringing into this partnership, or are we going to spend the next decade unconsciously recreating what we inherited? That conversation requires someone outside your system who can help you see what you can't see. This is exactly the work we do in the I Do Differently program. Deconstructing inherited patterns about gender and partnership, examining power dynamics, and building conscious systems together. And for couples ready to go even deeper, the Alchemy Intensive this February at the Ritz-Carlton Bacara is 4 days of facing the patterns you inherited and building something entirely new. It's not therapy. It's not a typical premarital class. It's a reckoning with old patterns and an alchemy that creates new ones. Subscribe for more on relationship equity and deconstructing patterns. And tell me in the comments, what unconscious pattern from your family are you most afraid of recreating? Thanks for watching.